Here's what will be included in the kit. Piece of high-density polyethylene plastic for the insole, soling rubber for the external sole, barge cement to adhere the external sole, gloves to protect your hands from the barge cement, and some electrical tape to keep the external sole in place while the barge cement cures. The parts that you'll need that are not included in the SoleMates kit are your prosthetic for outlining the insole, your prosthetic foot shell for outlining the external sole and for applying the parts, scissors to cut out the parts, Sharpie to outline the parts, paper towel for cleaning, and rubbing alcohol for cleaning the external sole before adhesion. For safety, you'll need to use the gloves whenever you're dealing with the barge cement, as well as be in a well-ventilated space so the fumes cannot harm you. Whenever you're cutting something out, we also ask that you be careful with the scissors to ensure that you don't cut yourself. We'll start with the internal foot shell. First, get your piece of polyethylene and your prosthetic. You'll use the prosthetic to size the insole because it fits perfectly inside your shell. Once you've placed the prosthetic on top of the polyethylene plastic, outline it with the Sharpie. Make sure to keep the Sharpie completely vertical when outlining the prosthetic. Once you finish tracing the prosthetic, you can cut out your insole. And then your insole will be shaped. Once you've cut out the insole, try and place it within your foot shell. Chances are it won't fit quite right the first time, and you'll need to trim it down a little bit more. Make sure to make small trims whenever you're cutting it down to ensure that it will end up taking the most space possible while still fitting. Now to begin the external sole. Get the rubber soling sheet as well as your foot shell and outline your foot shell on the rubber soling sheet. Once you've cut away the initial trace for the external sole, we'll cut it in two to protect the two main areas of wear. As you can see in this old foot shell, it typically wears through on the heel and on the ball of the feet near the toes. Mark where the arch of your foot starts and ends on your foot shell. Then, cut out those pieces. Next, we'll adhere the external sole with the barge cement. To begin this process, we need to make sure that the exterior sole of the foot shell is completely clean. So we'll use the alcohol and the paper towels to clean it off. It's important that once you've cleaned the external part of the foot shell, you verify that it is completely dry before you use the barge cement. Before you get the barge cement out, you want to get your tape and get about 6 to 8 inch pieces so that you're going to be able to wrap around the bottom of the foot shell and hold the external sole pieces in place while the barge cement cures. Now we'll apply the barge cement. As stated earlier, it's very important that you are wearing gloves whenever dealing with barge cement and in a well-ventilated space. While applying the barge cement, it's important to lay down a thick, uniform layer. If it looks like you have excess, don't worry, because you'll be able to squeeze it out when applying it to the bottom of the foot shell and clean it up with some of the paper towels. Once you've set the external sole in a proper location, use the electrical tape to secure it so it won't move while the barge cement cures. After taping, make sure that the external sole is completely flush with the bottom of the foot shell and everything is secured with the tape, and the tape is not slipping and that the tape is tight around every piece. Once the toe section is adhered and in a good place to set, you can begin with the heel following the exact same process. Once the external sole has been fully adhered and taped for curing, you can leave it in a dry, room temperature spot for 48 hours. Make sure to leave it in a space that has ventilation so the fumes do not hurt anybody. Once you've waited 2 days for the barge cement to dry, you can remove all the electrical tape and your foot shell will be ready to wear. When removing the electrical tape, make sure to be careful when pulling the tape up around the edges of the external sole. If the barge cement isn't fully cured, this can lift up the external sole and increase how much it'll be worn. After you've removed all the tape, check all the edges and make sure that they're fully adhered. If they're not, you shouldn't wear your foot shell yet. But if they are, then you're ready to wear your foot shell.